Hello, I'm going to tell you about the Rhythmicon, which is allegedly the first ever electronic drum machine. It was actually more than a drum machine, it was a polyrhythm generator. The idea for it was postulated by American avant-garde composer Henry Cowell in 1930. He wanted something that could instantly and easily and accurately produce polyrhythms, some of which would be very difficult for human musicians to play, some of which would probably be impossible. He spoke with instrument maker Léon Theremin, and by 1931 Theremin had made a working example of the Rhythmicon. He actually made 3 versions eventually, which all looked different but had similar characteristics. It was said about the Rhythmicon that it was wonderful in every respect, except it didn't work. So, I've tried to make a software version of it. And I've made a software version of something, which may or may not be the Rhythmicon. The Rhythmicon had a 16-note piano keyboard. The notes, the keys, corresponded to different rhythm patterns. So when you pressed a key, it played a rhythm pattern. The keys also seemed to lock down, so once you pressed the key, it would keep on playing that rhythm pattern until presumably you pressed it again and it unlocked. The first key played 1 beat in the bar. Second key 2 beats, third key 3 beats, up to the 16th key playing 16 beats in the bar. The sound, from what I've heard of the Rhythmicon, was obviously a simple electronic noise which was like tuned percussion, like a marimba. So, if you've got that set up, you press the 5th key and the 7th key, instantly you've got 5 beats in a bar against 7 beats in a bar. You've got a polyrhythm, which would be quite difficult for human musicians to play, but you've got it straight away. The way it created its sounds was using optical discs. Remember, this is 1931, this is still valve technology, it's before tape recorders had been invented. How I think it worked was that it was an axle being driven by an electric motor. That had a series of optical discs on it, which were discs that rotated with the axle, which will have had holes drilled in corresponding to the rhythm pattern. Lights would have been shone through, sensors on the other side picked up the lights, played the notes. Fine. The notes were actually part of the overtone series, but let's not worry about that. It's the rhythm patterns. First note played 1 beat in the bar, second note played 2 beats, etc. Fine. So, I've tried to recreate this in software. So using my software studio, I recorded a series of tracks. And I used, for this experiment, I used a bland tuned percussion sound. I used wood block, which is very bland. So I recorded a track, a 1 bar piece with 1 beat, 1 bar piece with 2 beats, etc. I would have gone up to 16, but for 2 reasons. 1, I got bored with doing it, and 2, once you get above 12, there's just too many bits, it's just a mess, there's just too much going on. So basically I've made a 12-note instrument, whereas the original Rhythmicon had 16 notes, 16 different rhythm patterns. Okay, but I lied to you when I said there were 16 notes. The Rhythmicon had 17 notes. The 17th key was the syncopation key. How did that work? I've no idea. It couldn't have just shifted all the rhythm patterns, because that still wouldn't be syncopated, that would just be delayed. So somehow this key must have shifted some of the patterns against other patterns. Maybe you pressed the key and the syncopation key together and they syncopated it, shifted it. So, I've made this software instrument where I've got 12 tracks, 12 different rhythm patterns. How am I going to simulate the syncopation? Well, I recorded another 12 tracks, all delayed by a 16th triplet beat. Then I recorded another 12 tracks, all delayed by an 8th beat. Then I recorded another 12 tracks, all delayed by a 16th triplet beat plus an eighth beat. I haven't actually sat down and worked out what that time is, but that's what it was. So I've ended up with 48 tracks, 4 12-track sections. So let's go and have a look at the software. Right, very quick look at my studio software. Here's the 12 different rhythm patterns. Here's the first syncopation, second syncopation, third syncopation. That's all you really need to know. You think, well, how am I going to play this? Well, on my software, I've put these recordings into an area known as the performance panel. When they're in the performance panel, they can be triggered by a piece of hardware called the Launchpad. So let's have a look at the Launchpad. Okay, so this is the Launchpad. Here's my set of 12 rhythm patterns. Here's the first syncopation, second syncopation, third syncopation. So you're saying to yourself, but this pad is only an 8x8 matrix, so how can that work? That's because I can shift it down so I can move the matrix around so I can see all 12 patterns. Right. Remember, I've used a bland sound here. I've used wood blocks. Here's the first pattern. So this is the fundamental note, and it's 1 beat in the bar. So that's pretty exciting stuff. So here's the 2. I've put the 4, and there's the 8. This isn't a polyrhythm. It's not very exciting at all, really. So let's put a bit of syncopation on the 4. And a different syncopation on the 2. So now it's sounding more interesting. But then, so this is a 3. Which put 3 against 4. Straight away, simple polyrhythm, and we can start syncopating them. So this has got 1, 3 and 6. There's 9. And again, we'll try syncopating things. And because it starts getting more weird when you put things like 5 in. So this is, we've got 1, 5 and 9. Some of the patterns are, quite frankly, a load of nonsense, but some of them are great. Of course, you go very high speed, it gets messy. But that's reasonably interesting. And, you know, 2, 5 and 7. And so on. And there are literally, imagine, thousands of patterns. A lot of which are rubbish, but some of which are fascinating. And that's not one of them. So, what was the point of all that? Why have you just wasted your time watching me? Was this just an academic experiment? Just trying to recreate something that didn't really work properly in the first place? Well, no. It's actually a useful musical tool. You can imagine there are thousands, probably tens of thousands of combinations of rhythms that you can set up on it. Now, a lot of them are quite frankly rubbish. There's just much too much going on, too much clashing beats. But there's some excellent ones. Play about with it for a while, think, oh, that's great, there's some great polyrhythms happening here, all sorts of strange things, syncopations, polyrhythms, fantastic. If I was going to use that for recording, and I will be doing, I'll play about with it until I have got a very interesting polyrhythm happening. I'll record that. Then I can go into my studio software, change the instruments. Remember, I've got separate tracks for each rhythm pattern. I could put separate instruments. I could take a drum kit, I could put a bass drum, a snare drum, hi-hat, cymbals, congas, what have you, on different tracks. I could use tuned instruments, I could use, say, pizzicato strings or what have you. Then I created a rhythm pattern and used that as the bed, as the basis for a piece of music. The interesting thing is that because it's the polyrhythms and the syncopation, you're going to come up with rhythm patterns that you're very unlikely to stumble across if you're playing with a normal drum machine or an arpeggiator, or even playing with normal musicians, because you're not likely to say to, you're jamming with some musicians, you're not likely to say, hey, you play 7 on the cowbell while I play 9 on the bass and the rest of the band playing 5, because that's not going to happen. But this, you can create an accurate pattern very quickly. Anyway, there you go. So I hope you found that stimulating, and go out and try things like that yourself. So, bye.